Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank you for an incredible year. We started back in January as a bit of an experiment, turning a failed YouTube channel about mysteries into a full-on true crime podcast. Never in our wildest dreams did we think we'd be heading into 2026 with this project starting to look like a real, viable business. That's entirely thanks to you for sticking with us through everything, including the early growing pains when we were still trying to find our voice and making plenty of rookie mistakes along the way. There's still a lot for us to learn, but your feedback has helped us improve a lot. If you ever have constructive criticism, don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact info is in every episode description. We read everything and genuinely use it to keep getting better. I'll stop yapping and leave you with today's episode, which also happens to be the final one of this season. We'll be taking a short holiday break and coming back with Season 3 in mid-January. We'll share exact dates as soon as we have them. Patreon billing is paused, so you won't be charged during this break. Oh, one last thing, and it's a big one. Our online store is officially live after months of behind-the-scenes work. You'll find the link in the description, and as a thank you for sticking with us, listeners get a 10% discount on every purchase, not just the first one. Just use the code NIGHTWATCH10 at checkout. All right, now I'll really get out of your way. Enjoy today's very special episode. Happy holidays. The morning of May 23, 1934, began early in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. 6 lawmen had been waiting in the brush alongside Highway 154 since the previous night. The air was thick with humidity and mosquitoes. Frank Hamer, the former Texas Ranger, checked his Colt Monitor machine rifle one more time. Beside him, 5 other officers crouched in position. They had been tracking their targets for more than 3 months. About a quarter mile down the road sat a disabled Model A logging truck. Its owner, Ivy Methvin, had positioned it there deliberately. The truck belonged to the father of Henry Methvin, a member of the gang the lawmen were hunting. The elder Methvin had made a deal. In exchange for a pardon for his son, he would help set a trap. Around 8 o'clock that morning, a tan Ford V8 sedan with yellow wire rim wheels had stopped at Canfield's Cafe in Gippsland, a few miles north. The occupants ordered breakfast and bought sandwiches to go. They were heading south on Highway 154 toward the Methvin family home, where they had been told Henry would meet them at 9 o'clock. The Ford was known to law enforcement. So were its occupants. 23-year-old Bonnie Parker and 25-year-old Clyde Barrow had been front-page news for months. They were wanted for multiple murders, bank robberies, and kidnappings across 5 states. 9 law enforcement officers had died during confrontations with the Barrow gang. 3 civilians were also dead. The couple had told their families they would never be taken alive. Clyde had vowed he would die before returning to prison. Bonnie had written a poem predicting their end. Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. Inside the Ford V8 were 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 sawed-off shotguns, several pistols, and enough ammunition for a small war. Clyde Barrow was known as an exceptional driver and a deadly shot. The couple had escaped numerous police ambushes before. They had survived shootouts in Joplin, Missouri and Platte City, Missouri. They had outrun pursuing officers across thousands of miles of back roads. But this morning was different. The lawmen hidden in the brush knew exactly where the couple would be and when. They had been given their orders. Put them on the spot. Shoot everyone in sight. At approximately 9:15, the sound of an engine approached from the north. Through the morning haze, the familiar V8 appeared on Highway 154. It was traveling south at moderate speed. The car slowed as it approached the disabled logging truck blocking part of the road. Frank Hamer raised his rifle. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born in 1909 on a farm outside Tellico, near Ennis, southeast of Dallas, Texas. He was the fourth of 8 children born to Henry Barrow and Cumie T. Walker. His father Henry was illiterate but had a strong aptitude for numbers. The Barrow family lived as tenant farmers across East Texas, moving between Nacogdoches County, Milam County near Jones Prairie, and Ellis County near Tellico. These were difficult years. Falling commodity prices and the devastation caused by the boll weevil made survival precarious. To supplement the family's income, Henry worked at a cotton gin and a brickyard in Ennis. For young Clyde, life followed the typical rhythms of a farm boy's existence. He showed an early interest in music, teaching himself to play the saxophone and guitar. He also harbored a deep desire to dress well. His older brother Ivan, known as Buck, had a significant influence on him. Buck was known for his hot temper, his readiness to fight, and his involvement in cockfighting and petty theft. Clyde possessed a similar temperament and would later demonstrate intense loyalty to those close to him. In 1922, when Clyde was 13 years old, the family abandoned farming and moved to Dallas. They initially settled in the campgrounds near the railroad tracks in West Dallas, an area known as the Bog or the Devil's Back Porch. The family's poverty was severe. At times they relied on free bread from the Salvation Army. Henry took work as a rag picker, collecting scrap metal. Eventually, he built a small wooden house for the family at 1620 Eagle Ford Road. When the family arrived in Dallas, Clyde had completed the 6th grade. He enrolled at Sidney Lanier High School but attended irregularly, often skipping class with his brother LC. The truancy habit he'd developed on the farm, frequently encouraged by Buck, continued in the city. By the time he left school, he had completed approximately the 7th grade. His mother, Cumie, was devoted to her children's education and insisted that without schooling, they would grow up to be idiots. Despite her efforts, Clyde's attendance remained sporadic. Though his formal education was limited, Clyde maintained several ambitions. He hoped to become a musician and held a fascination with aviation. After quitting school, Clyde sought employment. He wanted to afford nice clothes and the ability to take girls on dates. He found work at the Brown Cracker and Candy Company in Dallas, earning $1 a day. He then moved to Procter & Gamble, where he made 30 cents an hour, $18 for a 60-hour work week. His third job was with the United Glass Company, where he worked as a glazier for 2 years. The wages from these honest jobs proved insufficient for the lifestyle he desired. He wanted fashionable suits and the money to impress young women. This gap between earnings and aspirations would eventually lead him to supplement his legal income through crime. During this period, Clyde attempted to enlist in the United States Navy. His application was ultimately rejected by recruiters, a decision likely rooted in the lingering physical effects of a severe illness he had contracted years earlier. Shortly after the Barrow family moved to the West Dallas campgrounds in 1922, Clyde, his father Henry, and his sister Marie were all hospitalized as charity patients, suffering from what the family believed was either malaria or yellow fever. These diseases were common in the Bog. The rejection from the military was a significant disappointment for the teenager, as it closed off one of the few legitimate paths to a career outside the slums. Despite being deemed unfit for service, Clyde's aspirations for a naval career remained a point of personal identity. In anticipation of his enlistment, he had already had a tattoo of a shield with the letters USN inked onto his forearm. Prison records from 1930 later confirmed the presence of this tattoo, located on the inner part of his arm, alongside other ink including a heart and dagger and a girl's head. This rejection served as one of many early doors closed in Clyde's face, reinforcing his growing belief that he was a social outcast. By 1926, at 17 years old, Clyde was working legitimate jobs, but finding that honest wages came up short. He and Buck had become involved in a poultry business, buying and selling chickens. Clyde had previously been questioned over chicken theft. His mother would later believe his troubles began when he started associating with certain women who demanded a more extravagant lifestyle than he could afford. On December 3, 1926, Clyde was formally charged for the first time. He had tried to reconcile with his first serious girlfriend, Eleanor B. Williams. To visit her in East Texas, he rented a car but failed to return it on time. The rental agency reported the vehicle stolen, and Clyde was arrested in Dallas upon his return. His first mugshot, Dallas number 6048, was taken following this arrest. The charges were later dropped because the car was recovered and authorities determined no criminal intent was involved. Shortly after his release, Clyde joined Buck in acquiring a carload of stolen turkeys for the holidays. They were stopped and charged with possession of stolen goods. Buck took all the blame and served a week in jail. Clyde received what amounted to a slap on the wrist and was released. These early arrests placed Clyde firmly on the Dallas County Sheriff's list of suspected criminals. The authorities began to harass him regularly. Police would pick him up from his workplace for questioning on suspicion of various crimes, then release him without charges and without transportation back to his job. He would have to walk back, losing hours of pay in the process. This pattern repeated itself multiple times and eventually led to his dismissal from honest work. The constant police interference had a profound effect. Clyde became harder and more cynical. He developed what his mother described as a contempt or hatred for the law. He became convinced that the authorities would not allow him to lead a straight life. In his view, earning an honest wage seemed to be the hardest way after all. In early 1929, Clyde formed a partnership with Frank Claus, a young man from Dallas known as a professional second-story man. Clyde, Claus, and other accomplices participated in a series of burglaries and house break-ins across several Texas towns, including Dallas, Lufkin, Hillsborough, and Waco. His sister Nell suspected they were also cracking safes. Even during this period, Clyde continued attempting to hold legitimate jobs. He worked at the Bama Pie Company and later at the A&K Top and Paint Shop, but the police harassment continued. He was arrested 5 more times for suspected auto theft. This was followed by the same pattern of questioning and releasing without transportation. By Thanksgiving 1929, Clyde, Buck, and another man named Sidney Moore decided to travel north out of Dallas to look for a score. They left in a stolen Buick, but traded it for a Ford in Henrietta, Texas. They successfully broke into an unoccupied house but found very little cash, only some jewelry, which they split. On the way back to Dallas, they stopped in Denton and decided to rob the Motor Mart garage on Oak Street. On November 29, 1929, shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, they forced entry through the rear door. Inside, they found a small safe. After unsuccessfully trying to crack it on sight, they decided to load it into their car and take it with them. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a patrol car noticed the suspicious vehicle. When police attempted to pull them over, Clyde, who was driving, tried to flee. The chase ended abruptly when he took the corner from West Oak Street onto Piner too fast and broke the car's front axle on the curb. The crash left the men on foot. Officer Clint Starr shot Buck Barrow through both legs. Buck screamed in pain and was arrested where he fell. Sidney Moore stopped and surrendered. Clyde kept running. He hid under a house for the rest of the day, then hitchhiked back to Dallas. The stolen safe contained only about $30. Buck and Moore were also found with the jewelry from the earlier Henrietta burglary. The trio was indicted on December 6, 1929. Buck and Moore pled not guilty, but were quickly found guilty by a jury on December 17th. They were sentenced to 4 years and transferred to the state prison at Huntsville on January 14, 1930. Despite participating in the crime and the subsequent pursuit, Clyde was not charged in connection with the Denton job. Buck assumed full responsibility and never implicated his younger brother. Clyde was thoroughly unnerved by the experience, the chase, the gunfire. He lay low in West Dallas for several weeks, trying to process what had happened. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born on October 1, 1910, in the West Texas town of Rowena. She was the second of 3 children born to Charles Parker, a skilled brick mason, and Emma Krause. Because her father possessed a trade, Emma Parker maintained a strong sense of social superiority over the local tenant farmers, raising her children in a quiet life centered around the First Baptist Church. Bonnie was a precocious and resplendent child with cotton-colored curls and blue eyes. At age 3, she famously shocked her church congregation by singing the honky-tonk tune, "He's a Devil in His Own Hometown," at a social. In December 1914, her father died suddenly, leaving Emma with 3 small children, Bonnie, her older brother Buster, and her younger sister, Billie Jean, and no means of support in Rowena. In an act of family loyalty, Bonnie's mother moved the siblings to the West Dallas area, known as Cement City, to live with Bonnie's maternal grandparents, Frank and Mary Krause, at 2908 Eagle Ford Road. The relocation was a harsh adjustment, as the family transitioned from a respectable life in West Texas to a rough, boisterous industrial district choked by the smoke and foul fumes of nearby foundries, oil refineries, and the Trinity Portland Cement Company. While her grandfather Frank worked in a mill, Bonnie's mother sought to maintain their status by working long, tedious hours as a seamstress in an overalls factory, earning approximately $9.50 a week, while Grandma Mary looked after the children. Despite the poverty and pollution of the district, Emma continued to march her children to church every Sunday, determined that they should be seen as part of the best people, regardless of their environment. Bonnie attended school in Cement City and proved to be a star pupil. She won a spelling contest and showed a natural talent for music, singing, and reciting poetry. Her great aspirations were to become a famous star on Broadway or a renowned poet. Those who knew her described Bonnie as cute, energetic, and feisty, though she possessed a hot temper. She loved fashion and used makeup extensively. She had a strong sense of self-esteem and was fiercely devoted to her mother. On September 25, 1926, when she was not quite 16 years old, Bonnie married her high school boyfriend, Roy Glenn Thornton. She believed this marriage fulfilled her romantic dreams. To mark their commitment, she had a tattoo placed on her right thigh featuring 2 hearts labeled Bonnie and Roy. The marriage quickly faltered. Roy was a thief and began disappearing, often for weeks at a time, starting in August 1927. Bonnie could not bear to be separated from her mother. By the time Roy left for the 3rd time in December 1927, Bonnie decided their relationship was over. Roy's absences forced Bonnie to find employment. She began working in December 1927 as a waitress at Hargrave's Cafe on Swiss Avenue. She proved talented in dealing with the public and quickly became popular with customers due to her engaging nature. Bonnie Parker possessed a deep, maternal love for babies and children, often doting on her young nephews, Buddy and Jackie, and treating the children of the farm families they encountered on the road with characteristic kindness. Despite her strong desire for a family, she was physically unable to conceive, a situation her family attributed to unspecified gynecological complications or a medical procedure performed during her troubled marriage to Roy Thornton. Bonnie did not see Roy again until January 1929. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested for robbery and sentenced to 5 years in Huntsville prison. Despite her mother Emma's persistent counsel to divorce him, Bonnie never did. She believed it wouldn't be right to abandon him while he was imprisoned. She continued wearing his wedding ring. Early in 1929, Bonnie Parker began working as a waitress at Marco's, a restaurant located at 702 Main Street in downtown Dallas, conveniently situated near the courthouse and post office. While she spent her shifts serving high-profile customers such as lawyers, judges, and bankers, Bonnie was facing her own severe financial instability as an unemployed youth in a failing economy. Despite her precarious situation and the fact that waitresses of the era relied on tiny tips to supplement their meager wages, Bonnie possessed a soft heart for those even less fortunate than herself. She developed a persistent habit of slipping free meals and bread to destitute customers who wandered into the cafe with no means to pay. This charitable impulse likely stemmed from her own upbringing in the impoverished slums of West Dallas, where her own family had relied on the Salvation Army for basic sustenance like bread and bologna during their most desperate times. Her manager eventually discovered these unauthorized acts of charity and was so infuriated that he contacted Bonnie's mother to warn her that Bonnie would be canned if she did not stop giving away the restaurant's inventory. Although Bonnie assured her mother she would change her ways to protect her job, she clandestinely continued to feed the hungry for as long as she remained at Marco's. This period of quiet defiance only ended in November 1929, when the ripple effects of the stock market crash forced the restaurant to close its doors permanently, leaving Bonnie unemployed and increasingly disillusioned. By early January 1930, Bonnie was estranged from her husband, living with her mother, lonely and bored. On January 5, 1930, Clyde Barrow went with his friend Clarence Clay to a social gathering at Clarence's sister's house at 105 Herbert Street. Bonnie, still using her married name of Bonnie Thornton, was there. She was 19. Clyde was instantly smitten by her petite size and the way she hung adoringly on his arm. Bonnie found Clyde charming and a fast-moving wild card who was different from the other boys she had dated because he acted like he was in charge. She fell madly in love, and the two became inseparable almost immediately. In February 1930, Clyde was arrested at Bonnie's mother's house at 1406 Cockrell Street. He had been trying to keep out of sight of the laws because he was hot following the Denton robbery in late 1929. During a late visit, Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, suggested that he just stay over since it was so late. Because the house was crowded, Clyde was given the living room couch for the night. The police had learned through the grapevine that Clyde was seeing Bonnie regularly and had been watching the house. They surprised him the next morning while he was still sleeping, wearing Bonnie's brother Buster Parker's pajamas. He was transferred to Denton and eventually to Waco, where he was wanted on several charges. On March 11, 1930, Bonnie visited Clyde in the McLennan County Jail. Though she had no criminal record, she agreed to help him escape, viewing the risk as a romantic commitment that promised an exciting life of adventure together. This was her first active involvement in a crime. Following a map drawn by Clyde's cellmate, William Turner, Bonnie obtained a gun from a house at 625 Turner Avenue, finding the key where she had been told it would be. She smuggled it inside the jail by buckling an extra belt under her dress and concealing the weapon beneath her clothes. Clyde, Turner, and a third prisoner, named Emery Abernathy, used the gun to get the drop on the jailers and escaped that evening, stealing a green Ford coupe. Clyde did not return for Bonnie as planned. Though he had sent 2 men to fetch her, she did not open the door to the strangers and was left crushed and blue, eventually hitchhiking back to Dallas alone. While fleeing toward Illinois, he sent her a telegram and a note, the same one that had contained the map, stating, "You are the sweetest baby in the world to me. I love you." Their early romance was a spark in a dark room, a brief, intense connection that promised a way out of their dreary lives, but ultimately led them toward a flame they could not extinguish. Clyde was recaptured in Ohio on March 18, 1930, and returned to Texas. On March 2nd, he was sentenced in McLennan County for 7 counts of burglary and auto theft. His sentence was changed from 2 years concurrent to 14 years consecutive. He was officially admitted to the Texas State Penitentiary at Eastham Farm on April 21, 1930. Eastham was a prison farm located approximately 40 miles north of Huntsville. Convicts worked on about 75,000 acres of land, primarily farming or cutting timber. Conditions were notoriously brutal. Guards subjected inmates to arbitrary violence and beatings. The work involved running 2 miles to the fields, working 10 to 12 hours, and running back. One known punishment was riding the barrel, where inmates were handcuffed and forced to stand on a pickle barrel until they collapsed, followed by a beating. Soon after arriving at Eastham Camp 1, Clyde became the victim of Big Ed Crowder, a large building tender who subjected him to repeated beatings and sodomy. Sometime in 1931, Clyde resolved to kill his tormentor. Another inmate and building tender named Aubrey Skelly helped Clyde lure Ed to the dormitory toilets. Clyde used a length of lead pipe he had concealed in his trousers to fracture Crowder's skull, killing him instantly. Aubrey, a lifer with nothing to lose who hated Crowder for his own reasons, agreed to take the blame because he lacked the stomach for killing himself, but saw that Clyde did and wanted to be included in Clyde's future plans to raid the prison farm. To make the incident appear to be a legitimate fight between two building tenders, Aubrey stabbed Crowder's body and even cut himself on the ribs to simulate a struggle. As a result of this calculated deception, the guards viewed the death as a simple knife fight, and Clyde was never suspected. During this period, Bonnie's letters to Clyde slowed down and eventually stopped altogether because her mother was relentlessly pressuring her to end the relationship. Emma, who viewed the Parkers as a high-class family, was increasingly horrified by Clyde's criminal record and believed his malign influence was corrupting her daughter into the jargon of gangdom. Clyde Barrow viewed Eastham Prison Farm as a burning hell and reached a point of despair where he believed he would drop dead of exhaustion if he remained in the Camp 1 cotton fields. Facing nearly 12 more years of backbreaking 10-hour workdays and the constant threat of physical and sexual abuse from sadistic guards and fellow inmates, Clyde decided to utilize the common prison tactic of self-mutilation to escape the grueling farm labor. His specific reasoning for the act was twofold. He hoped to be permanently reassigned to a softer life inside the main prison walls at Huntsville, and, most importantly, he wanted to be reunited with his brother Buck, who had recently returned to serve time in that unit. On January 27, 1932, Clyde coaxed a fellow inmate into bringing the heavy steel blade of an axe down on his left foot, completely severing his big toe and part of a second toe. He was admitted to the Huntsville infirmary that day, but the permanent damage to his tendons and ligaments meant he would never walk normally again and would be left with a perpetual lurch in his step. In a tragic twist of timing, the lifelong disfigurement proved unnecessary, as his mother's efforts to secure his conditional pardon were successful just 6 days after his admission to the hospital. He was granted a conditional pardon by Governor Ross Sterling on February 8th and returned home wearing crutches. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Clyde immediately reunited with Bonnie, who was overjoyed to see him. He vowed he would die before he let the laws send him back there again. Bonnie initially told her mother she was through with him, but later confided to friends she loved the excitement of the outlaw life. Bonnie and Clyde began traveling with Ralph Foltz and Raymond Hamilton to finance an attempted raid on Eastham. On March 25, 1932, Clyde, Foltz, and Hamilton robbed the Sims oil refinery in Dallas but found the safe empty. Then about a month later, while attempting to steal guns for the Eastham raid, Clyde, Bonnie, and Foltz were chased by a posse in Kemp near Kaufman, Texas. Following a disastrous attempt to steal a car in Kemp and a subsequent flight on bareback mules, Bonnie was captured near Cedar Creek on April 19th after Clyde Barrow managed to sprint through the posse's line, while she and a wounded Ralph Foltz remained trapped in the mud. Seeking funds to finance the raid, Clyde targeted the store of 60-year-old jeweler John N. Booker in Hillsboro, Texas on April 30th because he was familiar with the layout and knew Booker kept a safe on the premises. While Clyde remained in the getaway car to avoid being recognized by Medora Booker, his accomplices Ted Rogers and Johnny Russell entered the shop under the ruse of needing to purchase guitar strings after hours. After using a $10 bill to pay for a 25-cent purchase, they forced Booker to open his safe to make change. When the safe was opened, Rogers pulled a pistol. Booker reached for his own weapon inside the safe, prompting Rogers to shoot him in the chest, killing him almost instantly. The gang fled with only $40 in cash and approximately $1,500 worth of jewelry. Meanwhile, Bonnie was transferred from a tiny one-room lockup in Kemp to the Kaufman jail, where she was held until June 17, 1932, because her mother refused to pay her bail in the hopes that the experience would serve as a lesson regarding her daughter's association with criminals. During her incarceration, Bonnie used old bank forms to compose a collection of verse titled Poetry from Life's Other Side, which included her famous poem, Suicide Sal, a work that used the jargon of gangdom to tell a story of abandonment and betrayal by an outlaw lover. Bonnie was finally released after testifying to a grand jury that she had been an unwilling kidnap victim forced to accompany the gang, a strategy suggested by Fultz to ensure her safety. Despite telling her mother that she was through with Clyde for good, Bonnie reconnected with him through the Barrow family and permanently joined him by the end of June 1932, choosing the danger of the road over the spirit-crushing tedium of ordinary life. On August 1st, Clyde Barrow and Raymond Hamilton executed a daring daylight robbery of the Newhoff Brothers Packing Company in Dallas, while their accomplice, Ross Dyer, waited in the getaway car. Before the heist, Clyde had dropped Bonnie Parker off at his family's gas station so she could monitor the radio for news of their escape. The bandits entered the plant's office at 4 p.m., held several employees and the owners at gunpoint, and made off with a $440 payroll stuffed into a grocery bag. During the robbery, Clyde became enraged when he discovered an antique safe contained only a box of change and stamps, hurling the box against the wall before the group fled to an abandoned farmhouse in Grand Prairie. 4 days later, on the evening of Friday, August 5th, the men drove north into Oklahoma in a car stolen from Corsicana, Texas. While modern research suggests Bonnie Parker was actually in Dallas visiting her mother at the time, earlier accounts from law enforcement placed her at the scene. The outlaws arrived at an informal roadside dance pavilion in Stringtown near Atoka, which was crowded with local families and featured music provided by a group of teenagers, including guitarist Ralph Duke Ellis and a fiddler. The atmosphere turned violent when Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Undersheriff Eugene C. Moore approached the outlaws' car to arrest them for the illegal possession of White Lightning moonshine. Unwilling to surrender due to their standing murder charges, Clyde and Raymond opened fire. Undersheriff Moore was killed instantly by a shot to the forehead, and Sheriff Maxwell was critically wounded with 6 bullet holes in his body. In the chaotic aftermath, Ross Dyer, who also used the alias Everett Milligan, was separated from the group and later captured after taking a bus to McKinney, Texas. Clyde and Raymond attempted a high-speed getaway, but Clyde overturned their Ford in a culvert, forcing the pair to flee on foot and steal a series of other vehicles, including a car belonging to Frank Smith, to finally reach safety. The incident in Stringtown was a point of no return for the gang, as the murder of a lawman intensified police pursuit across state lines and ensured the outlaws would never be taken alive. This escalation was like throwing a match into a powder keg. The relatively small-time thefts had now transformed into a high-stakes war with the authorities that could only end in death. The murder of Undersheriff Eugene C. Moore represented a grim milestone as the first of 9 law enforcement officers who would eventually be killed by the Barrow gang. Moore was a 31-year-old former farmer who had been wiped out by the Depression and was working part-time for the Atoka County Sheriff's Office to support his wife and 3 small children. The day after the murder, Bonnie was driven back to Dallas by an associate, likely Raymond Hamilton, and dropped off at her mother's house to maintain the fictitious story that she was working a legitimate job in Wichita Falls. Meanwhile, Clyde and Hamilton met with Clyde's mother, Kumi, at a cousin's house in West Dallas, where Clyde initially denied killing the officer before the trio decided to flee the heavy police presence in Texas and Oklahoma. At Bonnie's suggestion, the group traveled 475 miles west to visit her maternal aunt, Millie Stamps, who lived on a farm outside Carlsbad, New Mexico. During the grueling journey over rough dirt roads, Clyde drove the entire distance himself, operating the pedals in his stocking feet as he often did because of the injury to his left foot. While Bonnie initially introduced her companions as James White and Jack Smith, Aunt Millie grew highly suspicious of her guests because they were driving a luxury Ford V8 and spent their time doing loud target practice in the yard. On the morning of Sunday, August 14th, while the family planned a feast, Hamilton drove the stolen sedan into town to purchase a block of ice for homemade ice cream. His presence attracted the attention of Eddy County Deputy Sheriff Joe Johns, who was already on high alert due to a local car theft ring. After Hamilton drove past, Johns noticed the vehicle matched the description of a car reported stolen from a nearby motor court and trailed the Ford back to the Stamps' farmhouse to investigate the occupants. Bonnie answered the door when Johns knocked, but she told him the men were dressing and would be out shortly, a planned signal to Clyde and Ray that law enforcement was present. Johns then walked toward the car to investigate its ownership. Clyde and Ray went out the back door to confront the officer. Because their main arsenal was locked in the car trunk, they found and used a shotgun located in a closet. Clyde held the weapon on Johns, firing a charge of birdshot over the deputy's head, which knocked off his hat. Johns dropped his revolver, and the two outlaws took him captive, forcing him into the stolen Ford V8 sedan. They left Carlsbad immediately, heading toward Texas. The three outlaws drove all night, putting 500 miles between themselves and New Mexico. Johns was released outside San Antonio, Texas, early Monday morning, August 15th. Although unharmed, the deputy was exhausted. Johns quickly telephoned his office to report that he was safe but tired. Kidnapping charges were filed against Clyde, Bonnie, and Raymond in Carlsbad. On October 11th, Clyde entered Little's Grocery in Sherman, Texas, and attempted to rob the register of approximately $60. During the encounter, the assailant became uncharacteristically aggressive, kicking and striking butcher Howard Hall before the 57-year-old man attempted to resist. Hall was shot 3 times and died shortly after. Barrow also attempted to shoot clerk Homer Glaze, but his pistol misfired. While Glaze identified Clyde from a mugshot and a local deputy claimed he had seen Clyde in the area that day, he vehemently denied the murder to his family, insisting the gang was in Kansas at the time. This particular crime remains controversial because the brutal physical abuse of a non-threatening victim deviated sharply from Clyde's typical gentleman bandit modus operandi. On November 30th, the gang targeted the Farmer and Miners Bank in Oronogo, Missouri. Bonnie Parker played an active logistical role, scouting the bank's interior a week prior and waiting as the getaway driver in the Ford V8 a mile from the scene on the day of the heist. Inside the bank, the robbery was thwarted when cashier Doc Norton ducked behind a lead-lined counter and opened fire on Clyde and Frank Hardy. The gang escaped with only $80 to $110 after a brief firefight with armed townspeople, a disappointing take that led Frank Hardy and Hollis Hale to desert Clyde and Bonnie shortly thereafter. The gang's ranks were replenished on Christmas Eve, 1932, when Clyde recruited 16-year-old W.D. Jones in West Dallas, intending to use the hero-worshipping teenager as a lookout. On Christmas Day, Clyde took Bonnie and Jones to Temple, Texas, where he attempted to initiate Jones by ordering him to steal a Ford Model A Roadster belonging to salesman Doyle Johnson. Jones, while attempting to execute the theft, couldn't get the car started. Clyde became impatient and got out to help. Awakened by the commotion, Johnson's father-in-law, Henry Krauser, along with Johnson's wife Tilly and his son Clarence, ran out of the house. Doyle Johnson, 27 years old and spending Christmas with his family, ran down to the car and jumped onto the running board, grabbing the man attempting to steal his vehicle. As Johnson gripped Clyde's throat through the window, Clyde pushed a .38 caliber pistol into Johnson's side and pulled the trigger. Johnson managed to divert the weapon, causing the bullet to hit the front fender. Jones then fired a fatal shot that struck Johnson in the neck and snapped his spinal cord. The trio abandoned the stolen car blocks away and fled in their own V8, leaving Tilly Johnson a widow and her infant daughter fatherless. Clyde immediately ordered Jones to cut the telephone wires outside of town to prevent authorities from being quickly alerted. Jones had been with the gang for less than 24 hours. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The Barrow gang was characterized by constant membership turnover. Various individuals cycled through, serving for brief periods before leaving, being captured, or being killed. Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, had previous burglary convictions and had escaped prison in 1930. He received a full pardon in March 1933. He joined Clyde hoping to convince him to quit crime, but instead participated in major shootouts. Buck's wife, Iva Blanche Caldwell Barrow, was a preacher's daughter who followed her husband unwillingly. She served as a companion and driver. Blanche later wrote that she never fired a gun and was only present because she loved her husband too much to leave him. Ralph Foltz was Clyde's friend from Eastham who helped plan a raid on the prison. A criminal with a long background, Foltz briefly partnered with Clyde in early 1932. He claimed that Clyde's experiences in the brutal Texas prison system changed him from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake. Joseph Conger Palmer, known as Joe Palmer, was a career criminal and fellow Eastham escapee who served as a shooter and bank robber. He left and rejoined the gang due to poor health but was described as a reliable partner whom Clyde treated fairly. Frank Hardy and Hollis Hale partnered with Clyde in late 1932. They quickly split from the group after realizing the danger. Mary O'Dare was Raymond Hamilton's girlfriend who traveled with the gang for 3 weeks in 1934. She was intensely disliked by Clyde and Bonnie. She was captured after Raymond and sentenced to a year and a day for harboring. The gang's operational pattern involved robbing small-town gas stations, grocery stores, and small banks. They targeted locations such as the Sims Oil Company and the First National Bank of Rembrandt, Iowa. Clyde often used inside information to select targets, such as the payroll at the Sims Oil Refinery. Their operations spanned a vast area. They moved continuously across Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Louisiana, Iowa, Kansas, and Illinois. The gang was not sophisticated. They relied instead on speed, overwhelming firepower, and impulsiveness. Clyde Barrow was an extraordinary driver, possessing exceptional skill at high speeds on rough roads. Their vehicle of choice was almost exclusively the Ford V8 sedan or coupe, prized for its speed and steel body, which offered a degree of protection. Cars were obtained through theft. They would often hotwire vehicles. For evasion, they relied on road maps to utilize farm-to-market roads and backcountry roads, frequently switching license plates. In confrontations, they relied heavily on Browning automatic rifles, often stolen from National Guard armories. Clyde would sometimes cut them down, creating a compact weapon he nicknamed his scattergun. When escaping, Clyde would crank a large siren. Clyde's tactic was to strike first, as he had vowed never to be taken alive. However, the gang often preferred flight to confrontation. When confronting lawmen unexpectedly, Clyde's initial response was sometimes to take them hostage, driving them around before releasing them unharmed, sometimes with expense money. On one occasion, he took Officer Thomas Purcell hostage. Clyde was generally non-threatening to unarmed individuals during robberies. The gang was sustained by stealing small amounts of money, robbing targets for basic expenses. Crimes like the robbery of the interurban rail station yielded only $12. Clyde typically stole no more money than the amount of his immediate need. However, they occasionally succeeded with larger hauls. The R.P. Henry & Sons Bank in Lancaster yielded $4,176. The First National Bank of Rembrandt yielded $3,800. The reality of their life was far from glamorous. They were disorganized, impulsive, and often desperate. They were frequently injured and hungry. They survived by sleeping in their car or in abandoned farmhouses. They ate cold fare such as crackers, Vienna sausages, and canned beans. When they could afford the luxury, they stayed in motor courts. Bonnie, though often in pain after severe burns she sustained, would sometimes apply makeup and style her hair. On the cold and rainy night of January 6, 1933, lawmen from Tarrant and Dallas counties staged an ambush at 507 County Avenue in West Dallas, the home of Raymond Hamilton's sister, Lillian McBride. The authorities, led by newly elected Sheriff Smoot Schmid, were acting on information that Odell Chambliss, a suspect in the Grapevine bank robbery, frequently visited the home of McBride. However, Clyde Barrow arrived at the residence not as the expected robbery suspect, but to confirm if a radio containing concealed hacksaw blades had been delivered to help Raymond Hamilton escape from the Hillsborough jail. Clyde, along with Raymond's brother Floyd, had conspired to smuggle the blades so he could cut through his cell bars. Hamilton had been transferred to the Hillsborough facility to face murder charges in the J.N. Booker case. While Medora Booker correctly identified Clyde Barrow from mugshots, she mistakenly identified Raymond Hamilton as the triggerman because he closely resembled Ted Rogers, the actual shooter. Despite providing witnesses who testified he was in Michigan at the time of the murder, Hamilton was eventually convicted and sentenced to 99 years for the crime. Inside the McBride house, Hamilton's younger sister, Maggie Ferris, was being interrogated by a five-man posse, which included deputies Malcolm Davis and Dusty Rhodes from Tarrant County, who were waiting on the back porch in the dark. Ferris had used a small red light in the window as a prearranged signal to warn Clyde of the police presence, though the light was doused by Deputy Fred Bradbury shortly before Clyde's second pass. When Clyde finally approached the front porch, carrying a 16-gauge sawed-off Whippet shotgun hidden under his overcoat, Ferris opened the door and screamed, "Don't shoot! Think of my babies!" as a final warning of the trap. Barrow immediately fired a blast through the front window, forcing the officers inside to hit the floor, but his weapon momentarily jammed as he tried to clear a spent shell. As Clyde backed away to clear the jam, Malcolm Davis ran from the back of the house toward the front and was struck in the chest with buckshot, which knocked the officer face down onto the porch steps. Davis was a 52-year-old bachelor and a career lawman known for his quiet demeanor and his love of hosting fish dinners with catfish caught at Lake Worth. Despite attempts to rush him to a hospital, Davis died from his massive wounds before arrival. During the ensuing chaos, W.D. Jones provided covering fire from the car, while Bonnie Parker, who had been waiting behind the wheel, took over the driving to retrieve Clyde as he fled on foot through the backyard and down an alley. The group then sped west down Eagle Ford Road, successfully evading the police trap that had inadvertently caught them while they were on a mission of loyalty. In late March 1933, Clyde, Bonnie, and W.D. Jones met Buck Barrow and his wife Blanche near Fort Smith, Arkansas, and drove north to Missouri. The group rented a stone bungalow with rooms above a double garage at 3347 Oak Ridge Drive in the Freeman Grove subdivision of Joplin. They introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. W.L. Callahan from Minnesota and the sister of Mrs. Callahan, claiming that Mr. Callahan was a civil engineer. Blanche handled most of the administrative details. The gang's finances had dropped to as low as $8 at one point. Neighbors grew suspicious of the new tenants because of the out-of-state cars and occasional glimpses of guns and 1933 license plates being brought into the garage. Suspicion increased when Clyde accidentally fired a Browning automatic rifle in the garage. On April 13, 1933, local authorities assembled a five-man posse, believing the tenants were operating a bootlegging operation. The posse included Constable J.W. Harriman, Detective Harry McGinnis, and State Sergeant G.B. Kaler. They arrived just as Clyde and W.D. Jones pulled a stolen roadster into the garage, having returned due to a flat tire. When Harriman tried to enter the garage, he was struck by a shotgun blast to the shoulder and neck that severed two arteries, causing him to bleed to death on the driveway almost immediately after firing a single return shot. Harriman was a 41-year-old shoemaker and Shoal Creek Township constable who supplemented the income from his small farm by earning a few dollars for each warrant he served. Moments later, Harry McGinnis, a 53-year-old detective and acting chief, ran toward the door and managed to fire 3 shots through the glass before he was struck by buckshot that nearly severed his right arm at the elbow and hit him in the face. McGinnis was rushed to St. John's Hospital, but he died from his wounds later that evening. During the chaos, Buck Barrow, who had been napping when the fight began, ran downstairs to join Clyde and W.D. Jones in the garage, firing a weapon to provide covering fire as the gang prepared their escape. While the men fought below, Bonnie Parker was upstairs in her nightgown and slippers. She had been cooking a meal of red beans and cornbread and working on a new version of her poem, Suicide Sal, when the shooting erupted. Though some accounts from law enforcement claimed a woman was seen firing at officers from an upstairs window, W.D. Jones later maintained that Bonnie never fired a gun during the gang's major battles. The gang returned fire with overwhelming power from their Browning automatic rifles. The police, armed only with small handguns, fired 14 shots. W.D. Jones was wounded in the side, and Clyde sustained a chest wound from a bullet that barely penetrated his skin. The ambush failed when Detective George Highfill backed the police armored car out of the way, creating an escape route. Blanche walked out into the street to retrieve her dog, Snowball. Buck helped drag the wounded into the car and even moved McGinnis's body so the car would not run over him. Clyde then rammed the police car, blocking the driveway, and sped away. In their haste, the gang left nearly all their belongings. Police recovered 7 weapons, Buck's marriage license, and pardon papers, confirming the identity of the 2 older gang members. They also found Bonnie's poetry, a guitar, 5 pieces of stolen jewelry, and an empty whiskey bottle. 2 rolls of undeveloped film were recovered. The processed snapshots showed Clyde, Bonnie, and W.D. Jones posing with their weapons in front of their stolen car. The police found several pages of Bonnie's poems, which included a lengthy work titled The Prostitute's Convention, and another titled The Girl with the Blue Velvet Band, part of a collection she called Poetry from Life's Other Side. The media seized upon the visual evidence. One photograph showed Bonnie posing with a cigar. A photographer who developed the film penned in the cigar for a certain kind of joke. This fabricated image, copied and recopied, created the false media portrayal of Bonnie Parker as a cigar-smoking gun mole. Along with the violent nature of the crime, this propelled the Barrow gang into national celebrity, positioning them as anti-establishment heroes. Clyde gave Bonnie a typewriter. He used her literary efforts to communicate with the outside world, dictating a letter to Raymond Hamilton that Bonnie wrote. Bonnie had told Dallas County Deputy Ted Hinton that she would have liked being a singer or perhaps a poet. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On June 10, 1933, Bonnie Parker suffered horrific injuries when Clyde Barrow accidentally drove their Ford V8 off a 12-foot drop into a ravine near Wellington, Texas. While the car was overturned, sulfuric acid began to leak from the car's battery directly onto Bonnie's right leg. Contrary to some popular myths that she was burned in a fire, it was this caustic battery acid that caused the most significant damage. The severity was extreme. W.D. Jones later recalled that the hide on her right leg was gone from her hip down to the ankle, with bone visible in several places. In the immediate aftermath, local farmers used wet baking soda to neutralize the acid and applied cloverine salve, a standard country remedy. As the gang fled to Fort Smith, Arkansas, Clyde was forced to risk capture by hiring Dr. Walter Eberl, whom he misled by claiming a camp stove had exploded. The doctor noted that Bonnie needed hospitalization for her 2nd and 3rd degree burns, but since Clyde refused, a nurse was hired for around-the-clock care while Bonnie remained delirious with pain. During her tedious recovery, Bonnie became dependent on the narcotic Amytal to manage the agony, eventually requiring Clyde to forcefully wean her off the drug. The long-term effects of the burns were permanently disabling, as damaged tendons and ligaments caused her leg to draw up toward her thigh, making it impossible for her to walk normally or straighten her limb. For the remainder of her life, Bonnie either hopped on her good leg or had to be physically carried by Clyde. On the afternoon of June 23rd, a routine traffic investigation near Alma, Arkansas, transformed into a fatal gun battle when Buck Barrow and W.D. Jones were cornered while fleeing a $20 grocery store robbery in Fayetteville. Buck had been driving their stolen Ford sedan at nearly 60 miles per hour over the treacherous curves of U.S. Highway 71 when he crashed into the rear of a Chevrolet driven by a local mechanic named Weber Wilson. City Marshal Henry D. Humphrey, a 51-year-old farmer and high school handyman who earned only $15 a month as a part-time lawman, arrived at the scene for what he believed was a simple accident. Humphrey was particularly motivated to intercept the suspects, having been humiliated and tied up with baling wire by different bank robbers just 36 hours prior. Accompanied by Deputy A.M. Red Salyers, an electrician who served as a reserve officer, Humphrey approached the wrecked Ford only to be met with immediate violence. Buck Barrow opened fire first with a sawed-off shotgun, striking Humphrey in the chest at point-blank range and blowing him into a nearby ditch. As Salyers retreated toward a farmhouse to reload his 7-shot Winchester rifle, W.D. Jones provided covering fire with a powerful Browning automatic rifle, raking the area with bullets that chipped the house and nearby trees. Despite being outgunned, Salyers demonstrated exceptional marksmanship, firing a shot that smashed the Ford's horn button and clipped off 2 of Jones's fingertips as the outlaws scrambled to hijack Salyers's own vehicle for their escape. Henry Humphrey died from his massive wounds 2.5 days later at St. John's Hospital in Fort Smith, becoming the 5th lawman killed by members of the Barrow Gang. Following the shooting, the gang moved north into Iowa. After committing 3 small gas station robberies near Fort Dodge, the 5 fugitives drove 250 miles south and arrived late on July 18, 1933, at the Red Crown Cabin Camp in Platte City, Missouri. The cabin camp was located at the junction of US 71 and Missouri State Highway 59. They rented 2 adjacent cabins separated by a single garage. Clyde, Bonnie, and W.D. Jones stayed in one, and Buck and Blanche stayed in the other. They planned to stay a second night so Bonnie could rest and recover from her severe burns. The group quickly aroused suspicion from local business owners who frequented the adjacent Red Crown Tavern. Attendant Delbert Crabtree noted that a woman with reddish hair paid for the cabins with small change and that there were 5 people, though only 2 couples appeared to be registered. When Blanche purchased 5 dinners, paid for with more change, the tavern manager, M.D. Hauser, called Captain William Baxter of the Missouri Highway Patrol. The gang was confirmed to be the Barrows when a druggist called Sheriff Holt Coffey, who was already watching the cabins, to report that a customer had purchased bandages and medical supplies necessary to treat a badly injured person. Clyde heightened the danger when he drove into Platte City for burn ointment and overheard talk that the notorious Barrow gang was in the area. Sheriff Coffey, Captain Baxter, and a combined force of lawmen, eventually numbering 13, surrounded the cabins and parked an armored car in front of the garage entrance to prevent escape. Sheriff Coffey, shielded by a steel plate, knocked on the door of Buck and Blanche's cabin and ordered them to come out. Blanche stalled, replying, "Just a minute, let us get dressed." This gave Clyde a chance to act. He immediately opened fire with his Browning automatic rifle, riddling the armored car and wounding Deputy George Highfill in both knees. The bullets came through the armored car as if it were cardboard. The police returned fire, riddling the cabin walls with machine guns and rifles. Buck and Blanche were forced to make their escape by running out the front door and across the yard to the car parked in the connecting garage. Buck was shot as they ran, falling near the car. Blanche screamed and, aided by Clyde, helped drag her wounded husband into the back seat. Clyde managed to ram the police car blocking the driveway and speed onto the highway. Buck Barrow was hit with a .45 slug in the left temple, fracturing his skull and causing his brain tissue to exit his forehead. He was also hit twice more in the back. Doctors later found a .45 slug lodged in his chest cavity. Buck remained in and out of consciousness during their subsequent flight into Iowa. Blanche was hit by shards of exploding glass when a bullet shattered the car's back window, causing severe injuries to both eyes. Doctors later determined she had traumatic conjunctivitis and ultimately lost the vision in her left eye. Blanche was captured with her wounded husband at Dexfield Park, Iowa, on July 24, 1933. Buck died 5 days later, on July 29th, in King's Daughters Hospital in Perry, Iowa. His mother and brother Elsie arrived to be with him before he succumbed to meningitis or pneumonia caused by the wounds. Blanche did not attend Buck's funeral. She later confessed to joining Buck and was sentenced to 10 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary for assault with intent to kill Sheriff Coffey. By late August or early September, W.D. Jones had grown physically and emotionally exhausted by the constant fear and the harsh conditions of life on the run. Accounts of his departure vary. Some sources suggest he ran away after being sent on an errand in Clarksdale, Mississippi, while the Barrow family maintained that Clyde and Bonnie dropped him off in West Dallas to spare him further corruption. Although he attempted to return to a normal life picking cotton, Jones was captured in Houston on November 15th after being identified by an acquaintance. During intensive interrogation, he signed a 28-page confession in which he strategically portrayed himself as a forced companion and kidnapped victim who had been chained to bedposts to prevent his escape. This narrative was a calculated effort to avoid the death penalty for the various murders he had witnessed. Ultimately, Jones was sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary for his role as an accessory in the January 6, 1933, murder of Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis. The subsequent arrests and deaths convinced Bonnie's mother that life on the run meant terrible disgrace and death for her own children. On the morning of January 16, 1934, Clyde Barrow carried out the long-held vow to raid the Eastham prison farm. This operation was coordinated with the assistance of Floyd Hamilton and an ex-con named James Mullen, who had met with Clyde and Bonnie to smuggle 2 Colt .45 automatics into the prison compound. The weapons were hidden under a culvert and brought inside by a trustee to Joe Palmer and Raymond Hamilton, the primary targets of the break, who were joined in their flight by Henry Methvin and Hilton Bybee. As the prison work squads clearing brush were enveloped in dense ground fog, the escape plan turned violent. Joe Palmer approached mounted guard Major Joseph Croson and shot him at point-blank range. Although his name suggests a military title, Major was his actual given name, and he served as a high rider, a mounted backup guard selected for his marksmanship to prevent escapes. Croson, who was 33 years old, was struck in the stomach and the head. During the chaos, Clyde provided intense covering fire from a nearby gully, using a powerful Browning automatic rifle to spray bullets into the treetops to intimidate the other guards. Bonnie played a vital role by remaining behind the wheel of the getaway car. She sounded the car's horn continuously to act as a sonic beacon, guiding the escapees through the blinding fog toward the idling vehicle. While one guard attempted to return fire, the sudden barrage pinned down most of the staff, allowing the fugitives to scramble into the car. Major Croson lingered for 11 days before succumbing to his wounds on January 27th at Memorial Hospital in Huntsville. On March 29th, Wade Hampton McNabb was kidnapped north of Wascom, Texas, near the state line by Clyde, Henry Methvin, and Joe Palmer. McNabb was a trustee or building tender at Eastham Prison Farm who had been out on a 60-day furlough. McNabb had brutally beaten Joe Palmer in prison. Palmer orchestrated McNabb's temporary release. He was then beaten with a blunt instrument and shot several times by Palmer in an act of premeditated revenge. McNabb's body was found after a note was mailed to a Houston newspaper. Clyde and Henry Methvin participated in the kidnapping. Bonnie traveled with Clyde and the men immediately before and after the killing. The deaths of 2 lawmen on Easter Sunday, April 1st, generated immense public rage, transforming the pursuit of the gang into a nationally coordinated manhunt. Texas State Highway Patrolmen E.B. Wheeler and H.D. Murphy stopped to investigate a black Ford V8 sedan with yellow wire rim wheels parked on Dove Road, a dirt road just off Highway 114 near Grapevine, Texas. Clyde, Bonnie, and Henry Methvin were inside. Clyde intended to take the officers hostage, whispering, "Let's take them." Henry Methvin, who had been drinking, misinterpreted this command and opened fire with a Browning automatic rifle, also known as BAR, killing Wheeler instantly. Wheeler was 26 years old and died without drawing his weapon. Murphy, 24, a rookie on his first day of motorcycle duty, was fumbling for shells for his unloaded shotgun when Clyde fired his weapon. Murphy fell, badly wounded. He was engaged to be married. Henry Methvin then stood over the fallen officer and fired several more shots into his body. A witness claimed that Bonnie stood over Murphy's body and shot him repeatedly while his head bounced off the ground like a rubber ball. This false account, combined with finding a cigar butt nearby, led the public and police to view Bonnie as a kill-crazy floozy, drastically reducing her chances for clemency. The incident led to the immediate creation of a $1,000 reward for the dead bodies of the Grapevine Slayers. The reward was increased to include a $500 price on Bonnie's head. 5 days later, Clyde, Bonnie, and Henry Methvin found themselves in a desperate situation outside Commerce, Oklahoma. After driving through heavy thunderstorms, Clyde had pulled their stolen Ford V8 onto the muddy shoulder of a road situated between the Lost Trail and Crabapple mines to sleep. Around 9:30 a.m., Police Chief Percy Boyd and Constable Cal Campbell arrived to investigate a report of a carload of drunks. Campbell, a widower with 5 children, was a former contractor who had turned to law enforcement after the Depression destroyed his business. As the officers approached, Clyde attempted to flee by backing the car away, but the vehicle skidded into a deep, muddy ditch, pinning it in place. Seeing a gun through the car window, Constable Campbell drew his pistol and fired first. Clyde and a startled Methvin instantly returned fire with BARs. Campbell was hit in the chest, his aorta severed, and he died in the muddy road. Chief Boyd was struck by a glancing bullet to the head. He dropped to the ground, later telling reporters he almost dug into the dirt to survive the barrage. Clyde used his BAR to intimidate nearby mine employees and farmers, forcing them, and the bleeding Chief Boyd, to push the car. After a rope snapped during a towing attempt with a borrowed pickup truck, a local man named Charlie Dodson finally used a heavy chain on his truck to haul the Ford free. Clyde and Methvin then took Chief Boyd hostage, shoving him into the back seat for a 15-hour journey across the state line. During the kidnapping, Bonnie treated Boyd's head wound with a makeshift bandage and discussed her family. She famously made Boyd promise to tell the press she did not smoke cigars, as she found the popular gun mole image offensive, and to deliver her pet rabbit, Sonny Boy, to her mother if she was killed. Clyde eventually released Boyd unharmed near Fort Scott, Kansas, giving him $10 for a bus and noting that the chief had more real guts than anyone he'd met. The incident was a major turning point for the posse. Boyd provided a positive identification of Bonnie and Clyde, and a license plate seen during the encounter eventually linked the gang to several other robberies in the Midwest. Bonnie later wrote a finalized poem, often referred to as the story of Bonnie and Clyde, or the end of the line. It reflected Bonnie's strong belief that death was inevitable, expressing fatalistic resignation that the couple could never be free because the law always wins. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The Story of Bonnie and Clyde, a poem penned by Bonnie Parker. You've read the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Bonnie and Clyde are the Barrow gang. I'm sure you all have read how they rob and steal, and those who squeal are usually found dying or dead. There's lots of untruths to these write-ups. They're not so ruthless as that. Their nature is raw. They hate all the law, the stool pigeons, spotters, and rats. They call them cold-blooded killers. They say they are heartless and mean. But I say this with pride, that I once knew Clyde when he was honest and upright and clean. But the laws fooled around, kept taking him down and locking him up in a cell, till he said to me, "I'll never be free, so I'll meet a few of them in hell." The road was so dimly lighted, there were no highway signs to guide, but they made up their minds if all roads were blind, they wouldn't give up till they died. The road gets dimmer and dimmer. Sometimes you can hardly see, but it's fight, man to man, and do all you can, for they know they can never be free. From heartbreak, some people have suffered. From weariness, some people have died. But take it all in all, our troubles are small, till we get like Bonnie and Clyde. If a policeman is killed in Dallas and they have no do or guide, if they can't find a fiend, they just wipe their slate clean and hang it on Bonnie and Clyde. There's 2 crimes committed in America, not accredited to the Barrow mob. They had no hand in the kidnap demand, nor the Kansas City depot job. A newsboy once said to his buddy, "I wish old Clyde would get jumped. In these awful hard times, we'd make a few dimes if 5 or 6 cops would get bumped." The police haven't got the report yet, but Clyde called me up today. He said, "Don't start any fights. We aren't working nights. We're joining the NRA." From Irving to West Dallas Viaduct is known as the Great Divide, where the women are kin and the men are men, and they won't stool on Bonnie and Clyde. If they try to act like citizens and rent them a nice little flat, about the 3rd night, they're invited to fight by a subgun's rat-a-tat. They don't think they're too tough or desperate. They know that the law always wins. They've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that death is the wages of sin. Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief. To the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde. A few months earlier, in February 1934, Lee Simmons, general manager of the Texas prison system, hired Frank Hamer as special escape investigator for the Texas prison system. Simmons saw the Eastham raid as a personal assault on the system and was determined to make an example of Clyde Barrow. Frank Hamer was a former Texas Ranger captain known throughout the Southwest for his unequaled reputation for professionalism and toughness. His name was a legend in the Rangers. Hamer was credited with participating in over 50 gunfights, resulting in the deaths of 53 men and earning him 17 wounds. Though renowned for his athletic prowess and personal courage, Hamer was also known for his willingness to stretch the letter of the law. He was once reprimanded by a judge for conducting an unconstitutional search. In his pursuit of criminals, Hamer preferred that lawbreakers be met with a .45 slug in the gut. He believed that an officer must know the mental habits of the outlaw, how they think, and how they'll react in different situations. Hamer's reputation was so immense that he was considered a viable target for assassination by outlaws. He was known as a loner, often working by himself or with only a few trusted men. Hamer was a political adversary of the sitting governor, Miriam Ma Ferguson, who had previously fired every Texas Ranger. However, Simmons convinced Governor Ferguson to grant her political enemy authority for the new position. The terms of Frank Hamer's recruitment as Special Escape Investigator for the Texas prison system were specifically designed by Lee Simmons to provide the former Ranger with total autonomy and the necessary leverage to end the Barrow Gang's career. Driven by the humiliation of the Eastham prison farm raid and the death of Major Joseph Croson, Simmons explicitly instructed Hamer to put them on the spot and shoot everyone in sight, a mandate that prioritized the permanent removal of the outlaws over a traditional capture. To facilitate this mission, Governor Ferguson secretly guaranteed that she would honor any agreement Hamer made, including the authority to offer full state pardons to any accomplice willing to betray the couple. This unprecedented legal power allowed Hamer to broker the betrayal deal with the Methvin family. Regarding compensation, Hamer took a substantial pay cut, moving from a $500 a month private investigator role to a state salary of only $180 a month. But he was granted the unique incentive to claim any of the Barrow Gang's possessions as his own upon their death. Hamer's initial assessment was that Clyde and Bonnie vowed they'd never be taken alive. He initially hoped to take them prisoner by surprise, perhaps by sneaking into their camp while they slept and arresting them without a shootout to avoid killing Bonnie. Hamer quickly discerned that Clyde followed a general travel pattern, typically moving north from Texas into Oklahoma, Missouri, or Arkansas, then swinging south toward Louisiana, and eventually returning to Texas. He realized Clyde exploited the widespread lack of coordination among police departments across different jurisdictions. Hamer intended to use this knowledge against Clyde. Hamer gathered intelligence on the gang's preferred weapons, like the Browning automatic rifles, clothing, and habits. He used a car of the same type as Clyde's, a Ford V8, for his own travels, simulating the outlaw lifestyle. Hamer determined that the most likely way to predict Clyde's location was through his loyalty to his family. He realized Clyde and Bonnie made frequent trips to West Dallas to visit their families. He correctly deduced that if Bonnie was seriously injured, which she was due to severe burns sustained in the Wellington wreck, the Barrow gang was unlikely to abandon her, but would require medical supplies. Hamer initially began tracking them alone. The coordinated effort began in early February 1934. Hamer differed significantly from most local lawmen who had pursued the Barrows. He was not seeking crowds or publicity. He refused to speak to the press during the early stages of the hunt, maintaining a high level of secrecy. He believed capturing Clyde required superior tactics and concealment, not just chasing a speeding car. Henry Methvin was a 21-year-old former Eastham prison inmate known as Scar Neck. He was serving a 10-year sentence for assault with intent to murder and car theft when Clyde freed him during the January 16, 1934 prison break. Methvin was considered a reliable partner whom Clyde trusted implicitly. Clyde valued him because he was tough and willing to accept orders, a marked contrast to Raymond Hamilton. Though Methvin admired Clyde, he also feared him. After Raymond Hamilton left the group, Bonnie and Clyde confided in Methvin and brought him along on their movements. Methvin was actively involved in violence. He participated in the premeditated kidnapping and killing of former Eastham building tender Wade Hampton McNabb. On Easter Sunday, April 1, 1934, his hair-trigger mentality led to disaster. He and Bonnie had been drinking. Bonnie later told her mother that Henry killed both policemen at Grapevine. By early March 1934, Clyde's predictable movements between Texas and Louisiana made him vulnerable. Methvin's parents, Ivy T. Methvin and Avie Stevens Methvin, lived in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. They were desperate to save their son from almost certain death or life imprisonment. Hamer and Dallas Deputy Bob Alcorn were sent to Bienville Parish in early March and worked through Sheriff Henderson Jordan and family friend John Joyner to approach the Methvins. Ivy Methvin negotiated a deal guaranteeing his son a full pardon from the state of Texas in exchange for setting up an ambush. Governor Ferguson signed the written agreement. Methvin knew about the plot, and his parents convinced him to separate from Bonnie and Clyde so the lawmen could set the trap. After the Easter Sunday shootings, the urgency increased. Hamer formed a 6-man ambush party from various jurisdictions. Hamer himself as Texas Prison System Special Investigator, Manny Galt as Texas Highway Patrolman, and former Texas Ranger Bob Alcorn and Ted Hinton as Dallas County Deputy Sheriffs, and Henderson Jordan and Prentice Oakley as Bienville Parish Sheriff and Deputy Sheriff respectively. Hamer secured Oakley a Remington Model 8 rifle for the ambush. Hamer himself used a Colt Monitor machine rifle. The posse tracked the gang for many months. The coordinated effort that began in early February 1934 would culminate on May 23rd. In the days preceding the ambush, Bonnie and Clyde were living in their car or in abandoned farmhouses. Motor courts were no longer safe. Their activities focused on Bienville Parish. Clyde intended to buy land near the Methvin family's property, creating a safe place for long visits with their respective families. Their presence was not a secret in the parish. They were frequently seen around Gibbsland and Ma Canfield's cafe. They often visited the extended Methvin family, sharing evening meals with Henry's brothers and sisters-in-law. 2 years on the run had taken a severe toll. They were thin and gaunt from constant strain, lack of rest, and poor food. Bonnie was particularly diminished. Her right leg, severely burned in the Wellington wreck, was permanently damaged, causing her to hop rather than walk. She often drank alcohol, which Clyde excused because he felt she was in constant pain and didn't think they had much time left. They possessed a fatalistic outlook, believing death was the inevitable consequence of their choices. Their bond remained characterized by unwavering loyalty and deep love. Bonnie adamantly insisted that she wanted to die with Clyde when his time came. There were clear indications they believed their end was imminent. On May 6, 1934, during their last major family meeting in Texas, Bonnie gave her mother her final poem. During that same visit, Bonnie shocked her mother by discussing her burial, requesting to be taken home rather than to a funeral parlor, and insisting that her family never say anything ugly about Clyde. The next night, May 7th, Clyde visited his father alone and showed him a suitcase containing a large amount of cash and papers he intended to sign, likely a will, to settle his affairs. On Monday, May 21st, Henry deliberately slipped away from Clyde and Bonnie when they drove into Shreveport. Clyde and Bonnie had a standing agreement to meet Henry back at his parents' house on Highway 154 if they were separated. Ivy Methvin used this knowledge to lure them into the ambush site. Ivy told Clyde and Bonnie, who arrived at his home on Tuesday, May 22nd, that Henry would be there at 9 o'clock the next morning. Ivy Methvin positioned his disabled Model A logging truck on Highway 154, also known as Ringgold Road, to force Clyde to stop or slow down at the ambush site. Hamer's posse settled in on Tuesday night. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The last confirmed sighting of Bonnie and Clyde before the ambush occurred on Wednesday, May 23rd, 1934, around 8 o'clock in the morning, when they stopped at Canfield's Cafe in Gippsland for breakfast and purchased sandwiches to go. Re-entering the car, Clyde prepared himself for the drive as he usually did, removing his shoes to better feel the pedals, and placed a 16-gauge sawed-off shotgun between his leg and the door, while Bonnie sat beside him in a rust-red dress, clutching a napkin-wrapped sandwich and a nickel-plated .45 automatic. Their vehicle was essentially a mobile fortress, packed with an arsenal including 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 sawed-off shotguns, several pistols, and nearly 3,000 rounds of ammunition. Clyde was a master of the Ford V8, a car he prized for its ability to outrun virtually anything else on the road, and his uncanny sixth sense had allowed them to survive pitched battles and ambushes in Joplin, Missouri, Platte City, and Dexfield Park, Iowa. They had survived these encounters despite being significantly outnumbered and outgunned, often outrunning pursuit across thousands of miles of back roads while sleeping in their cars. However, the trap on Highway 154 was different because it utilized the only thing Clyde valued as much as Bonnie: family loyalty. The lawmen, Frank Hamer, Manny Galt, Bob Alcorn, Ted Hinton, Henderson Jordan, and Prentice Oakley, were hidden behind a blind of brush on a hill that gave them a perfect, unobstructed view of the road. They were acting on orders from prison manager Lee Simmons to put them on the spot and shoot everyone in sight, a shoot-to-kill mandate intended to liquidate the gang. At approximately 9:15 a.m., the silence of the woods was broken by the approach of the V8 engine from the north. Through the morning haze and lingering gun smoke from the lawmen's previous sleepless nights, the familiar tan sedan appeared. Clyde, seeing the disabled truck, slowed to a crawl and shifted into first gear to maneuver around the wheel in the road, unaware that the lawmen were already taking aim from the embankment just 30 feet away. As Ivy Methvin ducked toward the woods, a signal that the targets were in position, the ambush was sprung. The tension of the nearly 2-day vigil broke when Deputy Prentice Oakley rose from the brush and fired his Remington Model 8 rifle prematurely. His first .35 caliber round struck Clyde in the left temple, passing through his skull and killing him instantly. As Clyde's body went limp, his foot slipped from the clutch pedal, causing the idling car to lurch forward and begin a slow, uncontrolled roll toward the opposite ditch. Bonnie had only enough time to let out a piercing scream before the rest of the posse unleashed a deafening 16-second barrage of over 150 shots. The lawmen utilized BARs, a Colt Monitor, and shotguns, which shredded the car's steel body and shattered the glass. The Ford eventually coasted approximately 100 yards down the road, before coming to a final rest against an embankment. When the smoke cleared and the posse approached the riddled vehicle, they found a scene of total destruction. Clyde's head was hanging through the steering wheel spokes, and Bonnie was slumped forward, her body mangled by at least 26 separate wounds. The bodies of Bonnie and Clyde were left inside the bullet-riddled car at the ambush site until the coroner's jury and the wrecker arrived. Once the tow truck hooked up to the Ford V8, a large crowd gathered, swelling the procession to nearly 200 vehicles as it was towed toward the parish seat of Arcadia, Louisiana. After the Ford was unhooked from the wrecker at its destination, the car's engine still ran, and it was driven away to the impound lot under its own power. The bodies were carried by stretcher into the back room of Conger's furniture store, which served as the funeral parlor. The Bienville Parish coroner, Dr. J.L. Wade, conducted a brief external examination of the bodies. Clyde Barrow had been hit at least 20 times. Dr. Wade listed 17 separate wounds or hits, plus several shots entering the left shoulder joint. He suffered 2 headshots. One of the headshots instantly killed him by striking his left temple and exiting his right skull. Another bullet severed his spinal column. Bonnie Parker was hit at least 26 times. She sustained 3 head or face shots. One bullet hit her in the right cheek and shattered her jaw, leaving a gaping wound on the left side of her face. Another bullet tore several fingers from her right hand. Wade also listed her tattoos, including the one labeled Bonnie and Roy on her right thigh, and Clyde's tattoos. The scene was quickly overwhelmed by the public, turning into a strange kind of carnival atmosphere and a macabre trophy procession. The crowd at Arcadia swelled the town's population from its normal 3,000 to an estimated 16,000 people. Souvenir hunting began immediately at the ambush site, where locals gathered spent shell casings and tried to dig bullets out of nearby trees. People were so desperate for mementos that they plucked frayed strands from Bonnie's dress, ripped samples of her hair, and smeared their fingers in her blood. One man attempted to slice off Clyde's ear, and another tried to sever his trigger finger. When the tow truck stopped briefly in Gippsland, a crowd of schoolchildren swarmed the car, sticking their heads in the windows to view the corpses. At the Arcadia funeral home, the crowds became so unruly that the staff resorted to using embalming fluid as a means of crowd control. The Ford V8 sedan bore 167 holes in its body, counting entry and exit points. Its front seat and floor were soaked with blood. The posse found a significant arsenal inside: 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 sawed-off shotguns, several Colt handguns, ammunition, cosmetics, and Clyde's saxophone, all of which were inventoried. The Ford was displayed first in front of the funeral home, but due to the souvenir hunters, it was quickly moved behind a steel wire fence to prevent its destruction. The news of the slaying was flashed around the world, making front pages all over the globe. The frenzy resulted in an estimated 490,000 extra papers being sold in Dallas alone in the days following the ambush. Deputy Ted Hinton used a 16mm movie camera to film the scene and the other officers examining the car. Photographers were allowed to take pictures, and one photographer captured the bodies naked on the embalming table. Frank Hamer, Bob Alcorn, and Ted Hinton posed with the recovered guns for photographs. The lawmen were reluctant to speak, which fueled rumors that Clyde and Bonnie were betrayed by underworld associates. Hamer only confirmed that he hated to bust a cap on a woman, but added that it was necessary because of the officers she had killed. The families were notified by reporters. Emma Parker, Bonnie's mother, was told by a reporter over the phone and fainted. Henry Barrow, Clyde's father, and his son Jack drove to Arcadia to claim Clyde's body, where Henry was visibly distraught and wept constantly. Buster Parker, Bonnie's brother, was delayed, having mistaken Arcadia for Acadia Parish in South Louisiana. Clyde's wallet contained over $500 in cash. Despite Bonnie's written wish to be buried side by side with Clyde, the families refused a joint funeral. Emma Parker stated that Clyde had her for 2 years, and she was not going to let him have her in death. Clyde was buried first on Friday afternoon, May 25, 1934. The funeral was held at Sparkman Holt's Brand Chapel. The service, intended to be private, was overwhelmed by the public. Only about 50 people attended the brief service, including family, reporters, and law enforcement officers. Clyde's mother, Barrow, sobbed uncontrollably. Henry Barrow wept throughout the proceedings. Buck's widow, Blanche, did not attend. An estimated 10,000 people viewed Clyde's body at the funeral home. The public viewing turned into a scene of hysteria and morbid curiosity. The crowd pushed and shoved and were so unruly they had to be cleared by police. At the cemetery, the crowd pressed forward and stole flowers and clods of dirt for souvenirs. Clyde was laid to rest at Western Heights Cemetery, where he was buried beside his brother Buck. Bonnie Parker's funeral was held on Saturday afternoon, May 26, 1934, at the McCamey Campbell Funeral Home on Forest Avenue in South Dallas. The service had been specifically delayed to allow her younger sister, Billie Jean Mace, to attend. Billie Jean was being held in the Tarrant County Jail on a charge of murder related to the Grapevine shootings of 2 highway patrolmen on Easter Sunday, but she was granted a temporary leave after preliminary ballistics tests on the guns found in the death car indicated the outlaws were the true culprits. The atmosphere at the funeral home was heavy with both grief and public fascination, as an estimated 20,000 people had filed past Bonnie's open casket during a public viewing. Unlike the chaotic crowds at Clyde Barrow's service, the mourners for Bonnie were noted to be quiet and respectful. Bonnie was dressed in a blue silk negligee with her hair carefully styled and nails polished, though her face was covered by a filmy white veil to mask the devastating injuries she received during the ambush. During the private service, which was attended by approximately 150 friends and family members, the Reverend Clifford Andrews of the Gospel Lighthouse spoke, and a male quartet sang, "Lord, Abide with Me." The emotional toll of the tragedy reached a peak when Billie Jean fainted upon seeing her sister's face through the veil in the casket. Moments later, as the service concluded, Emma Parker also fainted and remained barely conscious as she was carried from the chapel to a waiting car. Immediately following the service, the procession began its journey to Fishtrap Cemetery in West Dallas, located near the farm where Bonnie's grandparents lived. 6 pallbearers, including Clyde's younger brother, L.C. Barrow, carried the casket to the hearse. Henry and Cumie Barrow were both present at the graveside to pay their respects. Among the massive floral tributes at the cemetery, the largest wreath was a gift from the Newsboys of Dallas, who had sold nearly 500,000 extra newspapers featuring the news of the outlaws' deaths. Bonnie was ultimately laid to rest beside her 2 young nephews who had passed away 6 months prior, rather than being buried side by side with Clyde as she had once requested in her poetry. Years later, in 1945, Bonnie's remains were moved to Crown Hill Cemetery in Dallas to rest beside her mother. Bonnie's funeral acted as a final curtain call for a tragic performance. While the public clapped and cheered for the headlines, the families were left to pick up the broken pieces of a stage that had been completely consumed by fire. Henry Barrow made no excuses for his son, but assured the media that the family held no animosity toward the lawmen because they were only doing their jobs. Buck's widow, Blanche, stated that it was probably the best thing that they both died together. A Dallas columnist observed widespread resentment against the officers who had ambushed the pair, noting that some people were calling the posse cowardly murderers. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Raymond Hamilton left the Barrow gang in early March 1934 after a bitter dispute with Clyde over money and his girlfriend, Mary O'Dare. He continued robbing banks, but was eventually captured in April 1934. Raymond accumulated significant sentences totaling 362 years and was later convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of Major Crowson, the prison guard killed during the Eastham Break. After the ambush of Bonnie and Clyde, Hamilton escaped from the Huntsville death house on July 22, 1934. He was recaptured and was executed in the electric chair on May 10, 1935, alongside Joe Palmer. Hamilton consistently claimed innocence in the Booker murder, saying the fatal shot was fired by his partner, Ted Rogers. Mary O'Dare was sentenced to 1 year and a day for harboring after she gave police information that helped lead to Hamilton's capture. Blanche Barrow later received an additional 1 year and a day sentence during the federal harboring trial. She was released after her sentence was commuted to time served on March 25, 1939. She maintained her loyalty to the Barrow family and years later co-wrote a memoir about her time with Bonnie and Clyde. Blanche died on Christmas Eve, 1988, at the age of 77. Ralph Fultz was sent back to prison after his April 1932 capture. He later became a trusted informant and confidant of Clyde, contributing detailed information about Clyde's plans, crimes, and prison experiences. After winning a conditional pardon, he joined Raymond Hamilton post-ambush for a series of holdups before being recaptured. He used his prison experience to become a speaker against crime and worked with the Buckner Home for Boys. Fultz died of cancer in 1993, one of the few associates to die of old age. Henry Methvin, though pardoned by Texas for his crimes, was convicted in Oklahoma for the murder of Constable Cal Campbell and sentenced to death, which was later commuted to life imprisonment. He served 10 years in an Oklahoma prison and was paroled in March 1942. He died on April 19, 1948, at age 36, after he was cut in half by a Southern Pacific passenger train at Sulphur, Louisiana. His father, Ivy T. Methvin, who was key to the ambush setup, died in 1946 under suspicious circumstances, which his family attributed to possible retribution. The outlaw couple's criminal career resulted in 9 policemen and 3 civilians dying due to their gunfights and jailbreaks. The long-term impact of the Barrow gang's actions was borne by the innocent, who had to live on in hard times without a husband or father. H.D. Murphy was a 24-year-old rookie, killed just 12 days before he was scheduled to marry his 20-year-old fiancée, Marie Tullis. The couple had recently rented a furnished apartment. Howard Hall was 57 when he was killed. He left behind a widow, 1 son, 1 brother, and 2 sisters. Doyle Johnson, who was killed trying to stop the theft of his car, was 27 and left his wife of 5 years, Tilly Krauser Johnson, and their infant daughter. Henry D. Humphrey, 51, held his job as city marshal for $15 a month to help support his wife. His daughter, Velma Humphrey, and nephew, Walter Patton Jr., recounted the story of his killing to an author. The Texas Highway Patrol superintendent offered a $1,000 reward for the dead bodies of the Grapevine Slayers, and Governor Ferguson added an additional $500 for each killer. The reward money promised to the 6 lawmen who killed Bonnie and Clyde, initially rumored to be $26,000, was mostly withheld by organizations and government bodies who reneged on their pledges. The officers each ultimately received only $200.23. Clyde and Bonnie occasionally provided unsolicited funds or aid to their civilian victims. Clyde returned the $27 WPA paycheck to laborer Ollie Worley during a robbery, saying, "We don't want your money, just the banks." They also gave money for bus fare to hostages H.D. Darby and Sophie Stone, and Police Chief Percy Boyd when they released them after abductions. The public perception of the outlaw couple completely overshadowed the memory of those they killed. The public viewed the lawmen and bankers as part of a faceless them, who in some sense deserved what they got. During their 2-year crime spree, Bonnie and Clyde were front-page news for several months in the early 1930s, fueled by the fact that stories about them boosted newspaper and magazine circulation. The press and authorities generally pictured them as depraved, bloodthirsty animals. Authorities routinely portrayed them as cold-blooded killers, happy to pick up on any rumor or lurid detail, regardless of how outlandish, because hard times meant those kinds of stories sold newspapers. Bonnie even wrote in her poem that the media printed lots of untruths about them, claiming they were not so ruthless as that. They were constantly accused of crimes they did not commit, such as the Kansas City Depot job. Some anti-establishment feeling that turned them into heroes existed even when they were alive, though only among those who were not in their line of fire. Readers, often reeling through the Great Depression, were desperate for entertainment. Many Americans considered cops and bankers to be their enemies. Bonnie and Clyde came to epitomize the edgy daydreams of the economically and socially downtrodden, who resented their own powerlessness and poverty. For these fans, the couple offered a vicarious sense of revenge. The suggestion that they were like Robin Hood was part of the legend. However, the reality of who they robbed contrasts sharply with this myth. They routinely hit small places, filling stations and stores, and used that money to finance their travels and purchase goods, not necessarily to redistribute wealth. The true story of Bonnie and Clyde differs from the public perception, often contradicting the sensationalized media accounts. Bonnie herself told captive Chief Percy Boyd, "Tell them I don't smoke cigars." She viewed the pervasive cigar-smoking gun mall image as all wrong and found the association vulgar and unladylike. W.D. Jones testified she never fired a gun during the time he was with them, but was adept at loading them. Bonnie's own sister, Billie Jean, was falsely charged with the Grapevine murders based on a witness's claim that a woman did the shooting. Contrary to portraying them as glamorous, clever, and rich, they were often scrawny, financially pressed, frequently running on small takes from small-town holdups, and sometimes incompetent crooks. They were once robbed when they attempted to rob a bank that had failed only a few days before. In contrast to the attractive portrayal in later films, in reality, Clyde was crippled from cutting off 2 of his own toes in prison, and Bonnie was severely injured, often having to hop rather than walk. After their deaths, Bonnie and Clyde faded from the scene and the public memory for a while, but the 1967 movie brought them back. The film, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, was only occasionally accurate as history, but was a public relations success for the couple. It came out during the turbulent 60s, presenting the couple to a new generation as anti-establishment heroes. The film's immense popularity caused the legend to grow. The film, using dramatic devices, left the legend at variance with fact in countless places. For instance, the movie made Blanche Barrow look like a screaming horse's ass, leading Blanche to sue the movie company. The movie also perpetuated the idea that Bonnie was the kill-crazy floozy. Veteran lawman Ted Hinton saw Bonnie and Clyde's story primarily as one of the great love stories of the century. Their love was an intensity that kept Bonnie Parker at the side of her man, even when she could have left him and sought clemency. She chose to have those remaining weeks or days with Clyde Barrow rather than come in. Although she had multiple opportunities to leave the criminal life and may have faced only a prison sentence if she had surrendered, Bonnie chose instead to remain with Clyde. She was characterized not as a coerced victim, but as a headstrong, manipulative, spoiled individual who decided to stay with her lover, believing that life without her man would be no life at all. Even after more than 40 years, people remained inquisitive about them because their brief, violent lives transcended criminal behavior. They were driven by a desperate desire to force the world to acknowledge them and matter. A significant debate surrounds whether the final ambush was a justified act of law enforcement or outright murder. Dallas County Deputy Ted Hinton's son noted that the 6 officers involved intentionally broke the law to capture Bonnie and Clyde, believing that the necessity of catching the notorious killers outweighed the violation of rights. Following the ambush, Hinton stated that this use of overwhelming force led some observers to criticize the lawmen as cowardly murderers. The officers were more castigated than praised by many for their trouble. Bonnie and Clyde both confirmed to their families and associates that they vowed they'd never be taken alive. Clyde preferred resistance over surrender, and Bonnie was resigned to the fact that the law always wins. To shield Henry Methvin from retribution and protect the legal premise of the ambush, the posse fabricated the story that Ivy Methvin was captured and handcuffed to a tree. Ted Hinton later admitted that he and the other officers withheld facts about the ambush by mutual agreement to protect the deal and themselves. The story of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow that emerged was a mixture of truth and fiction. Early published accounts were filled with errors, leading to distortions. The 1967 film further cemented a romanticized version that bore little resemblance to reality. What remained was a legend built on Depression-era desperation, media sensationalism, and the public's need for anti-establishment heroes. The couple's 2-year crime spree ended on a rural Louisiana road on May 23, 1934. They were 23 and 25 years old. In their wake, they left a trail of violence and a mythology that continues to overshadow the human cost of their actions. Families were left to grieve and struggle without husbands, fathers, and sons. The victims, men like H.D. Murphy, who died 12 days before his wedding, and Henry Humphrey, who earned $15 a month to support his wife, received little lasting recognition. Their names faded while Bonnie and Clyde became immortalized. Bonnie Parker had written her own epitaph. Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde.